now?
Yeah, you can present.
Okay. Hi, my name is Zaeid, and today I'll be talking about fur trade and colonization. Introduction. The fur trade helped meet the demand for fur in Europe with its fashion craze and encouraged colonization, and it enabled settlers to coexist and cooperate with indigenous peoples to build an economic foundation for Canada. Connections. Specifically, I researched how the indigenous peoples used their boats to transfer fur, meat, and other items to training centers. And because I was interested in indigenous stories and values, and history, it motivated me to pursue research about indigenous peoples and the fur trade and colonization. My big wonder question is, how did the fur trade systems contribute to the colonization of Canada? The fur trade was a key reason for why Europe colonized Canada, and the colonization of Canada occurred when explorers and settlers from another continent navigated to Canada and started to control the indigenous peoples. Additionally, diverse populations played a vital role in the fur trade, including indigenous peoples, Métis, and Black people. In the New West Narrative Times 1859, the article said that voyagers depended on indigenous women to keep their canoes in good condition, and they were often called pit mechanics. At every single stop, they would check the bark of the canoe and would repair it with tree gum if damaged. My first sub-question is, how are the fur trade and colonization connected? The fur trade allowed countries to make money and send settlers, who were traders and religious missionaries, trying to change indigenous peoples to Christianity. And during this time, Britain was choosing prices for fur deers, and some of the prices were $1.50 to $8 for beaver fur, $4 to $10 for otter fur, and $10 to $50 for brown bear fur. Moreover, explorers Alexander Mackenzie, David Thompson, and Simon Fraser began the fur trade in British Columbia, and the fur trade helped Western exploration and colonization. What was the indigenous perspective on the fur trade? The fur trade fit well into the indigenous people's way of life, but at some times it had a negative effect on them. Also, since the year 1807, American traders went past the Rocky Mountains and into Canada, but were stopped and killed by Blackfeet Indians, stated the Republican compiler. How did Black people contribute to the fur trade? What did they do? The slave trade assisted France, England, and their colonies in making them rich, and their fur traders were occasionally enslavers, and Black fur traders were slaves with connection to slavery. Black people frequently worked as translators because it's easy for them to know the languages of the indigenous peoples because they were Métis or they were married to indigenous women. What and when was the colonization of Canada? The colonization of John Cabot became the first European to land in Canada after the Viking Age under letters from King Henry VII of England. He saw land on June 24, 1497, and in 1534, Jack Carrier planted a cross at Gaspé Peninsula and claimed the land for Francis I of France and later called the area Canada. In the Republican compiler 1818, they stated that the NWC and HBC, both defended by the English government, carried down St. Lawrence first to Missouri and Mississippi. What was the Confederation? Why did it begin? The Confederation refers to the undertaking of the Federal Union, where the British North American colonies of New Brunswick, the province of Canada, and Nova Scotia merged to create the Dominion of Canada. The conference that made this happen was the London Conference, and it was from December 1866 to February 1867. The result from this conference was the British North American Act 1867, which is now the Constitutional Act 1867. The Confederation happened because of fears of getting annexed and destroyed by the US, and the British North American Act was signed by Queen Victoria on March 29, 1867. And here are my pictures. In this first picture, I'm not sure if you can see, it displays cooperation and respect between indigenous and European fur traders. And in my second picture, which is also over here, it shows that canoes were very useful in the fur trade because it allowed indigenous and European fur traders to send trading items to other settlements that are separated from land by a body of water. And in my last picture, which is over here, this is at a museum called Fur Trade at Lushan National Historic Site. These historical sites help preserve important Canadian history and teach us about the past. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for giving us that interview or that presentation, Zaid. I really loved reading your presentation because I thought that it really included lots of perspectives that I hadn't really learned about with the fur trade. So I know lots of people know about the fur trade, but I think by including the Black people's perspective as well as women's perspective really made your project really strong. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on women's role in the fur trade.
Like for example, when explorers used to like navigate like long distances to trade, and like indigenous women's husbands, they would set up camp, they would cook food, and they would really help the traders with like food, clothing, setting up camps, like for temporarily live in until they finish trading.
Mm-hmm. And what lessons do you think that we can learn from the fur trade that we could apply today?
I think we can learn that the fur trade has helped Canada become what it is today, but it negatively impacted Indigenous peoples. So we should know about the fur trade in like depth and detail, so we can solve problems now with land ownership rights for the Indigenous peoples, so we can coexist with the same rights. But we need to know about the past first to create solutions in the future.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I think Heritage Fair is a lot about learning about what we did in the past so that we can shape the future in a better way. Can you think of any specific industries in Canada that you think specifically developed because of the fur trade?
Well, I know one company, Hudson's Bay Company or HBC. It was a major fur trade company. Yeah, but now I think it just sells clothing items and other wardrobe items.
Yeah, I think you're right. So they've definitely kind of evolved with the time and shifted to possibly a market that's more applicable today. When I was reading through your project, I noted that you had a lot of really good information. Do you want to tell me a little bit about the sources you used for your research and what was the most valuable one?
I used the Canadian Encyclopedia and the Republican Compiler, which is an article from the past. The Canadian Encyclopedia was very useful because it gave me a lot of information about fur trade and colonization, and it was actually the only website that gave me information about how Black people contributed to fur trade in Canada. And the Republican Compiler also gave me useful information about trade deals and many useful information about Indigenous peoples and how they were included in the fur trade and colonization.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. And do you want to tell me a little bit why you chose to do your project on the fur trade and personal connections you have to your project?
I chose this topic. I chose to do my project about the fur trade because I wanted to learn how Canada was formed, and I wanted to know what happened before and how Indigenous peoples lost their land ownership rights, and how we can like form solutions here in the present. But yeah, I wanted to mainly learn more about Canada and its past. I wanted to know more about Indigenous peoples in depth, and I wanted to learn how they contribute to fur trade and help Canada become what it is now. But I know it negatively impacted them, so I think we need to find solutions now in the future. But we have to look into the past first.
Mm-hmm. And did you find that you had any challenges throughout the development of your project?
Yeah, at the beginning of my project, I really didn't know what a heritage fair was, but my classmates and my teacher helped me, and also mainly with my poster, I had some trouble cutting paper because I wasn't really accurate with cutting paper and doing my poster because I've never done a poster before. Yeah. So, but my teacher and classmates helped me. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And I know lots of students, after you do the first project, it definitely gets easier to keep doing new projects each year because you have the skills to make a project. You just have to find a new topic that you're interested in. So with that in mind, what research skills did you learn throughout the development of your project? And how do you think you'll be able to apply them to either future Heritage Fair projects or just future projects in school?
I learned that I can like research more in depth than I thought. Like I would have thought I would have not added this much detail on my research. Yeah, and I would do the same thing. I would add a lot of detail in future Heritage Fair presentations. I would maybe explain more about my topic in more in depth than I did now. Yeah.
And what one thing was really interesting that you found through your project? I know for me that the women's role in your project was really interesting, and I hadn't learned that when I was in school. So what's something that you found was just really fascinating with your project?
One thing that I found was really interesting that how the indigenous peoples like really helped Europeans traders and explorers and settlers navigate through Canada because Europeans wouldn't have known how because it's the new world as they called it. So I was really surprised that indigenous peoples have helped them so much, but how the Europeans turned back on them and stole their land ownership rights and took away their culture. That was really surprising, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I liked how you highlighted some of the benefits of it, but also acknowledged that there were problems with it, because you're right in that it really did help develop Canada as a country. But I agree with you that it could have been gone about in a better way.
Yeah.
So we kind of touched about this a little bit, but what impact do you think your topic has on Canadians today?
I think Canadians should wait. What do you mean by impact?
Like what lessons we can learn from your topic, or how Canadians should feel about it.
I think Canadians should acknowledge Indigenous peoples and respect them and treat them as they're any other people. And we should acknowledge that we're living on their unceded territories, and that we should learn how to solve solutions now in the past to make Canada a better country so it can coexist better with Indigenous peoples. And yeah.
I completely agree. And just to wrap up, is there anything else about your project or your research process that you want to tell me about? Anything
My
that we haven't covered yet?
what?
Anything that we haven't covered yet that you want to talk about?
I don't think so.
No. Do you want to talk about did you draw the illustration under your
Oh,
title?
right. My teacher helped me with the title, how to like draw it, and I made this picture on my own about the types of animals that were I drew this picture that were used in the fur trade and killed, and what were their prices.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for presenting, and you did a great job answering all the questions.
Thank you.
I think your project was so well done in that you really took it in a unique perspective and included information that I'd never heard. So yeah, great job.
Thank you.